Last one. What's your thoughts on the continuity argument with Muhammad? The idea is in order for Islam to claim to be in continuation of the Abrahamic, tradition, it has to in some way have evidences for this. But the evidence for this has to come from something outside of the message of Islam, just as if you sent a messenger to declare war on behalf of a king to another country, and then when he arrives there, they ask him if he himself is declaring the war or the king is doing so. And the only evidence he has for it is to refer to the letter being sent, but nothing external. So then the evidence for him declaring the war is the very thing he is using to declare the war itself, which is circular. So if the Quran is evidence that Muhammad is indeed in continuation with the line of the prophets, that's circular because it's evidencing itself, but there is no external evidence to showcase that Muhammad continues the line of the prophets.
Yeah, so that's the debate that Muslims and Christians have.
Yeah.
Whether Islam is actually like a continuation.
Yeah.
It's the same type of debate that Christians have with their Jewish cousins, whether Christianity is also a continuation.
Sure. And then we have our way of proving that, but what would be your? We can appeal to something outside of the Gospels in order to essentially sort of prove that. So how does it?
I like the higher critical method. Using that to kind of validate the Quran.
But yet validate the higher critical method won't help you validate the continuation.
I disagree.
How so? How will the higher critical method help you validate the continuation from Abraham to Muhammad?
In terms of like if you look for the quest for the historical Jesus,
yep.
It does appear that Jesus was apotheosis, which is made into God over time. So if you compare the same stories that are repeated in more than one gospel, you find that the later gospels they substitute like human titles for more divine titles, and they have been suppressed. So like the transfiguration of Jesus, when Jesus is transfigured in front of the disciples, Peter addressed Jesus as Rabbi in Mark, but in Matthew, so the reference is in Mark chapter 9 verse 4, the reference in Matthew is Matthew 17 verse 5, and there Peter calls Jesus Lord. So Matthew has substituted the word Rabbi for Lord, like a more lofty.
And that is working on the assumption that
Mark is the earliest, and that Matthew used Mark.
And generally scholars today would agree.
Howdy.
Stratford when Avery was in.
How's it happening? How's it going?
Yeah, good man. How are you? Good?
I'm good. Just having a mini little debate with the cameras behind. So yeah. So I'll be done with it.
But I would also point out that obviously Matthew's aiming at a specific audience, being the Jews, and he was trying to get a theological point across with that. And Mark the same, he was speaking a bit more generally, so Jews or Gentiles.
Ultimately as well.
He's writing to a new generation of Christians, and he's repeated the same story that was said before, but he's also sanitizing the story in order to bring out what Matthew was.
Which bit was that?
So Matthew's improving the story in order to bring out what Matthew wanted people to believe in, that Jesus is Lord.
If your assumption is that Matthew's was not the first one written.
Well, it doesn't make sense why someone would feel the need to write Mark's Gospel if Matthew was written first. Since almost all of Mark is contained in Matthew's Gospel, whereas Mark lacks many teachings that are found in Matthew's Gospel, like the resurrection.
But Matthew is specifically bringing Jewish theology under scrutiny, they're trying to demonstrate how Jesus is that Messiah who was to be sent to the Jews, whereas Mark is bringing the gospel of Jesus, which is a gospel for Gentiles and Jews.
Matthew incorporates almost all of Mark, like 95%, but Mark doesn't have the Sermon on the Mount, or he doesn't have like the virtue sayings or the resurrection story where Jesus appeared to the disciples in Galilee. So it makes more sense why Mark was written first and why someone else felt the need to write Matthew to include these extra stories and extra teachings of Jesus than the other way around. Why would Mark omit many of these extra
Yeah, but
stories
Mark
and
was writing in a language for other people to understand.
teachings. Sure.
So
But in terms of the resurrection story,
if you
why
were
would
if you were a
Mark
Jew
delete that?
reading Mark, then it wouldn't read to you the same as if you were a Jew reading Matthew, because Matthew points to the Old
But in
Testament.
terms of
points to the
Jesus
prophecies.
being resurrected from the dead, that will be important for all Gentiles and Jews, regardless of which audience it is. But it would seem odd, why would Mark delete the resurrection story and only have the woman not say anything to anyone, that remained because they were afraid. But then Matthew has it that they were afraid and overjoyed, and then they go and tell the disciples that Jesus is risen and go to Galilee, and that's where they see Jesus. So it makes more sense why Matthew would add that rather than Mark would delete that.
But do you think Mark deleted it, or do you just think that our manuscripts
So
don't have
I
it
think
because
Mark
it got
ended
lost?
his gospel originally at verse 8 with the woman not saying anything to anyone. But then Matthew and Luke both independently, they admit Mark mention about like the woman being absolutely silent, and so Luke removes any reference to Galilee from his gospel and has Jesus appear to disciples in the upper room in Jerusalem, and there Jesus instructs them to remain in the city and not to leave until they. But in Matthew's gospel, Matthew doesn't have any reference to Jerusalem, but in Matthew's gospel, they're told to go to Galilee, and that's where they see Jesus in Galilee. So both Matthew and Luke, they improve Mark because they're not satisfied with the way Mark.
I think Mark's pretty good.
I agree. Mark has the arguably the highest Christology out of all the synoptics, because every chapter of it, the Markan style is comparable to ancient battle motifs, or in like Roman literature. That's why it begins by not only quoting the Old Testament passages in Malachi and Isaiah and in Exodus and applying those things to Jesus, but also proclaiming that he is here to proclaim his evangelion, which in a Roman context or a Greek context is something that is done when a king ascends, or an emperor ascends into his emperorship. The evangelion, or the good news of the victory in a battle, or the choosing of a new emperor, are the things that are spread around to the people. So already in Mark 1, he's framing Jesus as God, coming with a message that should be celebrated, like a battle being won over, or like a king an emperor being sort of like celebrated for coming into the throne. In fact, I can bring you up the Evangelion of Augustus Caesar, and it's actually strikingly similar to what is in Mark 1. So actually, and also as you know, emperors were divinized upon like receiving their emperorship. They were the sons of God, if you will, the sons of Jupiter or the sons of Zeus. Yeah. So in the same way, Mark is taking that particular style, and in the very first verse of the first few verses of a chapter, declaring already that Christ is God. So the idea that Mark is the least Christological in terms of the magnificence of Christ, and it only gets like broader as time goes on, isn't actually true.
In terms of the magnificence of Jesus in Mark's gospel,
yep.
None of the gospels admit that or delete that. So those passages in Malachi and Isaiah, you also find that in the other gospels, including John's gospel. But in terms of if you were to compare Mark's gospel with gospels that came after Mark, they have an even more higher Christology than compared to
every
Mark.
chapter of Mark has high Christology, which is interesting.
Really.
Even in Mark 14, where you have the Son of Man coming on the clouds, like that is literally calling himself the second Yahweh. So actually, it's everywhere.
In that one, it doesn't explicitly refer to Jesus as the Son of Man, but Luke adapts that saying and makes that Son of Man about Jesus.
Well,
even though it's a prophecy about a future.
A prophecy wouldn't cause them to rip their clothes.
It can.
It wouldn't, because
well, that's the thing that doesn't make sense to some scholars, as to why would it be considered blasphemous to prophesied the coming of the Son of Man if Daniel was already part of the Jewish canon.
Right.
So if Jesus is just simply prophesying about the future Son of Man, it would be strange for these scholars to rip their clothes.
Yeah, easy. The rebuttal to that would be their expectation. Remember, a good example of this is in the Quran when Moses approaches Pharaoh and tells him that God or Allah has sent him to declare that there is one God, believe in him. What does Pharaoh reply? If God had truly sent you, you would have come with angels clad in gold and be clad in gold. So their expectation for the Son of Man is not what they're currently seeing in front of them. This man who's been arrested and is currently...
What's the expectation?
The expectation is like a magnificent ruler of some kind who will free them from the Romans, just like in the book of Judges.
Their view is that that Jesus was undermining their temple authority because he basically disagreed with them about the Sabbath.
That was the initial view, and then later on they had also additional charges. What more evidence do we need? Yeah. This man claims to be God.
When he said that, I am the Son of Man and will come riding on the clouds, their very next thing, they're tearing their clothes. And
what more evidence do we need? Yeah.
We're saying, you've heard it with your own ears.
Well, he never says I am the Son of Man, but in answer to, it's in Mark chapter 14, verse 68.
Sure.
He says, it's basically an answer to the question.
He says, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?
And he says in answer,
I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated on the right hand of the power, coming with the clouds of heaven. So if he's not talking about himself, why did they then accuse him of blasphemy?
What further witness do we need? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision?
He must have been talking
so something about what he says blasphemy.
There was nothing factually that he said that was blasphemy.
Meaning that he was applying it himself then?
But they were content, they already made up their mind. They want to sentence Jesus to death. Because even Pilate knew the only reason why they wanted to kill him was because they were jealous, not because he factually...
but Pilate doesn't... So Pilate wouldn't judge somebody on the Jewish law. He'd be on the Roman law. What he's done...
But that's besides the point.
Pilate
knew that it's because they were jealous. But I guess, are you saying that Pilate was factually wrong?
No, not that he was factually wrong, but he would have no care for prophecy, for blasphemy or prophecies.
That's what Matthew says. Pilate's reasoning is that they were jealous of him, not because Jesus factually did something.
But Pilate couldn't find anything wrong with him.
Yes.
I agree, and nor could they.
And so
is why they had to force.
That's why
evidence.
The charge that they brought up against him, Pilate wouldn't have actually cared for it, because Pilate, being a Roman citizen, doesn't care for fulfillment of prophecy or even blaspheme the God of the Jews.
Sure, but he crucifies him because they said to him, if you don't, then you're no friend of Caesar.
Yeah, I'm not contesting that. I'm not contesting that. I'm contesting the idea.
They basically force him, or they twist his arm.
Sure.
To have him crucified. But in terms of the Son of Man, in Mark's Gospel, future coming Son of Man. But in Luke chapter 19, I think it's verse 69, Luke changes the Son of Man saying, where Jesus says, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of God. But in Mark's Gospel, it's future, like the Son of Man is yet still to come.
Well, no, he's just quoting. He's quoting what it says in the Old. Yeah, but he's quoting what it says in the Old Testament in Mark. And in Mark, the audience understands that when he's quoting it, that it's
rather than quoting, I would say.
Well, referencing whatever term you want to use, the receivers of the reference understand that he's applying it himself, and that's always the case when they want to stone him.
He applies that in Luke 19, but in Mark it's ambiguous.
Well, it wouldn't be. It would only be ambiguous if you had zero context clue to actually justify why they then do the action following it. And it wouldn't be ambiguous if something occurs, if someone says a thing, and the reaction from a crowd is that they get angry, then you can assume that the...
Well, interesting enough, in Luke's Gospel, there's no blasphemy. So Luke removes reference to there being blasphemy, but you have that in Mark's Gospel where they're charged with blasphemy.
Again, that's fine. We allow for the variation because they're human authors, so that's fine with us. But the problem still remains that we don't see apotheosis happening.
Method,
yes?
In terms of my view is that overall validates in terms of Quran's message about who Jesus is, in terms of the continuity.
Yeah,
But
I get that.
the historical critical method will say he was crucified, and you disagree with that.
But
So
the Quran says that it appeared to themselves that he was crucified.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would expect.
But when you go
people
to the
say he was
Quran
crucified.
and you have the same
but then
story
that's not a theological problem.
in two places, and it says
Brought up before.
something differently. So, for example, where the Pharaoh says to the people that he is a learned magician, a skilled magician, and then it's then mentioned in another story where he says that the chiefs said to the Pharaoh. So it's the opposite.
But
way
you
round.
wouldn't say it was
Same
omitted
Three
or,
types of,
or
like,
embellished.
divine agency.
But what I'm saying is that this is one
Yeah.
person who has produced two stories, the same story, and they conflict. Whereas in the Gospels, where you're saying there's confliction, it's two different people who have written their perspective.
It's not the same comparison, the same analogy.
It would be.
Why
wouldn't it?
I-
Same story,
I think-
different details.
I think it.
Because Javad Hashmi talks about this actually.
Sorry?
Javad Hashmi talks about this. He calls them parallel readings, where you have the same story, like Pharaoh, like with Mary, like with Moses or Musa at the burning bush, and you have different details being given. So when Moses steps somewhere, something is said. And it differs between Surah 20, 27, and 28. So what that would indicate is actually what we Christians use for the Gospels. That different authors wrote these down from their own perspective, as opposed to coming from the same divine source, because otherwise it would literally be contradictory.
Yep. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
there are not differences, but
Mhm.
in terms of the differences in the Gospels is that one like substitutes human titles for a more lofty or divine title for Jesus to make Jesus appear bigger, greater, and also they omit human references to Jesus, like Jesus not knowing something, for example, like a woman touches him from behind,
So-
and Jesus asks. "Who
So
touched me?"
I've got a question.
But-
Is there
Matthew-
one
Well,
gospel?
Well, actually, that one. So just very quickly. So that one doesn't indicate that he doesn't know who touched him. He just asks who does it, because even in the Old Testament, even in the Quran, there are times when Allah asks questions of people, but that doesn't indicate that either the God of the Bible
But the
or
difference-
Allah don't know
Yeah,
anything.
Sure, but the difference is that God doesn't keep on then looking to see who has done it. Whereas
If God
based
comes
on
in the
Jesus-
flesh, then humans look around. So he would do it.
But Jesus, when he asked who touched him, the disciples, say, "What do you mean who touched you? There's so many people touching you." But Jesus, not being satisfied, he still keeps on looking to see who has done it until the woman comes forward.
Yep.
But in Matthew's version, Jesus already knows, so he instantly turns and looks at the woman and says, "Woman, it is your faith that brought you here." So Matthew's removed any ambiguity about Jesus not knowing something, and that made Jesus look appear more divine.
And my question to you
Oh.
was,
Now, Matthew's version is
Yeah.
more Christian, and Mark's version is more
Yeah.
Muslim.
I could simply say it's adding more detail on Luke, for example.
But I would say these are ad hoc explanations.
I mean, I would go with-
It being ad hoc doesn't mean it's wrong. Because
Because you're coming with the assumption of the Trinity and that he's already God, so you're
What-
trying to explain.
I'm
those
taking him
verses
being God from
away.
Mark 1. Him being God is Mark 1. That's what I'm taking it from. So even without assuming the Trinity, Mark 1 already says he's God.
Well, I believe that doesn't teach that he's God anyway.
Well,
but even if
think
you
about
take
it.
that-
If he doesn't teach us God,
and it's not teaching the Trinity, by the way.
that's fine. For the Trinity, we can go to other verses for that. But if he isn't God in that verse, in Mark 1, then why is it applying the things that Yahweh will do to the person of Jesus?
But it does the same thing for Moses. You have Yahweh text applied to Moses as well. So, for example, Jesus speaks about circumcision and says Moses gave you circumcision. But in the Old Testament, it's actually Yahweh giving it to Abraham, the commandment of circumcision. So this is like Jewish idiom or figure of speech.
But Mark
They have
isn't
divine
written
agency.
to a Jewish crowd.
But Mark does have figurative interpretation as well.
But so you've taken something that was in one language and applied it to a whole different language. But the issue is that the writing of Mark in chapter 1 literally applies prophecies about when God himself will come and points it towards Jesus. And also proclaims that Jesus is bringing a gospel which is only brought in by a king who, by the way, in the Roman context, would claim to be divine. So it's like a double hit for divinity for Jesus.
According to Mark, Jesus is the Christ, Messiah, so he represents God on earth. So when Jesus comes, he's God's emissary or ambassador.
Sharing in the same nature. Which is the difference?
Use that language,
it doesn't use emissary either.
But it calls him Messiah. Messiah means God's anointed.
Ex-
Someone
ex-
who's been appointed by God.
Exactly, right? But it doesn't mean that he's his emissary. So actually, he claims to be the very Son of God, which, according to the Jewish audience that receive it, have him supposing that he's equal with God.
Well, I mean, it depends on which translation of Mark, because in some Mark 1 there's like a manuscript variation where this is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So some manuscripts, like the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Sinaiticus, don't have the title Son of God, but just simply this is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Dave, are you going to wrap this up? Or?
Yeah,
I think Naz needs to go anyway.
I've talked up a lot of it.
No,
It's a nice
good.
conversation. We don't really get to speak much, but
Whenever.
I'll give you the final word.
Oh no.
We can carry on.
Well, again, okay. I guess then the sort of major point we sort of went side by side a little bit, but I hold to the view that the apotheosis, or the gradual development of Christ becoming more divine, is not actually a narrative that holds any more water, at least with more modern scholarship that we have today. Maybe it was a proposed idea about 10 plus years. Huh? So again, Mark Goddard, I'd point you to him as well. And also, there's I'll get it for you again, but there's a book that talks about the writing of Mark and how it is complementary with a certain style of writing popular in Rome that talks about divine figures. So it's called like a Roman battle motif. So actually, what we're seeing in Mark isn't actually telling us that Christ is only a human, historical, apocalyptic prophet, but it keeps comparing him constantly with God in almost every chapter.
Because
I'll bring that one as well.
Yeah, because of Acts, we know that that Mark would have travelled around into these Roman cities, and so he would have had the exposure to the Greek mythologies, the Greek style of language of the day. So it's understandable. It's in the Book of Acts where he travels around.
Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Nice talking to you.
Oh yeah, I'll find one more thing for you as well. I was going to show you the Evangelion of Augustus Caesar, but I'll get it for you. I'll come on, I'll get it for you. Yeah, no worries. I'll pull it out and read it. I'll come to you. That's fine. Yeah, so this is something interesting. So this is something found on the calendar inscription of Pliny, and this is from 9 BC. So this is the Evangelion, or the Gospel of Augustus. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because I'm making a claim that Mark's Gospel uses a Roman combat motif that effectively takes some of the popular notations from Roman mythology and Roman audiences and formulas and apply that to the person of Jesus Christ. So in Mark 1, you have the notation that the Christ is coming, that it quotes Malachi, it quotes Exodus, it quotes Isaiah, and effectively the things that God or Yahweh is going to do are then applied to the person of Christ. And it says that he's bringing his Evangelion, which I said before is something that is done either on the proclamation of the winning of a battle or on the ascension of an emperor into his emperorship. So this is something that was written for Augustus. So, and again, it's on the calendar inscription of Pliny, the second part of the calendar inscription of Pliny from 9 BC. It says, "It seemed good to the Greeks of Asia, in the opinion of the high priest Apollonius of Menophilus, since Providence, which has ordered all things and is deeply interested in our lives, has set in most perfect order by giving us Augustus, whom she, Providence, filled with the virtue that he might benefit mankind, sending him as a savior, both for us and for our descendants, that he might end war and arrange all things, And since he, Caesar Augustus, by his appearance excelled even our anticipations, surpassing all previous benefactors, and not even leaving the posterity, even leaving to posterity any hope of surpassing what he has done. And since the birthday of the god Augustus, so this is Caesar, was the beginning of the good tidings, Evangelion, for the world that came by reason of him. So essentially, Augustus is the reason for the world being into being, which Asia resolved in Smyrna. So it's showing here that Mark would have been aware of something like this existing for Augustus, being that Judea was a Roman province. And he's applying something similar to what you have in Mark 1, or what you have in this inscription here, to Mark 1. So actually, it's a polemic against the idea that all things came into being for the god Augustus, aka Caesar Augustus, the emperor of Rome. But instead, all things came into being for who? Jesus Christ. And because of him. So yeah. Pretty good. I'll have Rev and Sogo put it up for you. Again, it's called the second part of the calendar inscription of Prene, so Priene. And I think it's something good to pull up and have a read through. But yeah, anyway, God bless you guys. See you.